Vivian Grant had been counting down the days. 12 weeks, 3 sessions a week, of grueling, painful, humbling physical therapy. After her knee replacement surgery, every single stretch, every single step felt like a war against her body and sometimes her pride. She was 67 now, with salt and pepper curls and the kind of soft, quiet demeanor people mistook for fragility. But Vivian was not fragile. She just hadn't had a reason to show her strength in a long time. Her husband Calvin had driven her to nearly every appointment. Dutiful, steady, not always present in the way she wished, but reliable. For most of their 42-year marriage, Calvin had been the kind of man who liked routine more than romance, silence more than stories. She'd learned not to ask for too much, at least not out loud. Today was supposed to be her final session, the day she'd walk out of that cold therapy room without a cane, without pain, without anyone's help. Vivian had dreamed of this moment in quiet hours, when she lay awake in the dark, listening to Calvin's soft snores. She wanted to feel proud again, capable, herself. And yet, as they pulled into the parking lot, she felt uneasy. Calvin didn't offer his hand like he normally did. He stayed in the car longer than necessary, fiddling with his phone, then glancing up as if surprised she was already halfway to the entrance. "You sure you don't want me to come in?" he asked flatly. Vivian smiled politely. "I'm sure. Last session. You can just relax." He gave a quick nod but didn't return her smile. Just went back to whatever he was doing, face barely visible behind the reflection of his windshield. Inside, the air was crisp and clinical. The therapy center always smelled faintly of antiseptic and fabric softener. Vivian clutched her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she checked in. Then from the far end of the hall, she heard that familiar voice. "Vivian, my favorite patient." Melissa, Vivian's assigned physical therapist for the past 12 weeks, a striking woman in her mid-40s, tall and toned, with sleek blonde hair always pulled back in a high ponytail. She had that overly friendly tone Vivian never quite trusted, like every word she said was meant for an audience. Vivian had often wondered if Melissa treated all her patients like this. Overly enthusiastic, always touching, always laughing a little too loudly at things Calvin said. At first she chalked it up to Melissa's youthful energy, but lately it had started to feel like something else. Still, Vivian kept her suspicion to herself. After all, Calvin was hers. Had always been. Melissa was a professional. She had no reason to doubt either of them. Until today. Melissa ushered her into the rehab room, where sunlight poured through wide glass windows, and the polished floors echoed every footfall. The session began like any other. Knee bends, wall squats, walking the parallel bars. But there was a strange electricity in the air. Melissa was distracted, checking her phone between exercises. At one point, she giggled at a message she didn't show. Vivian tried to stay focused. She wouldn't let anyone ruin this for her. But then, midway through her second lap, Vivian saw something that made her stop cold. Melissa's phone was on the counter, unlocked, lit up, a text message thread wide open. And there, clear as day, was Calvin's name. Her stomach clenched. Vivian wasn't the kind of woman who snooped. She never needed to. But something told her this wasn't innocent. She took a step closer while Melissa walked away to grab resistance bands. The message preview read, "Calvin, can't wait till we don't have to sneak around anymore. I'll be waiting outside." Same time? Vivian's chest constricted. Her throat burned. The bands Melissa returned with suddenly felt like shackles. The woman she'd trusted with her recovery, with her pain, with her vulnerability, had been lying to her. Worse, so had Calvin. Vivian didn't speak. She didn't scream. She didn't let the tears rise just yet. She simply resumed the final exercises, finishing every move with controlled, quiet precision. If they thought she would crumble, they didn't know her. She wasn't going to fall apart. She was going to stand taller than she had in years. And as she took her final steps down the length of the bars, Vivian knew one thing for sure. They wouldn't see her coming. Vivian didn't speak on the car ride home. She'd walked out of that clinic without a limp, her cane in one hand, dignity in the other. Melissa had offered a chirpy, "Great job today." her voice dripping with fake sincerity. Calvin had been waiting in the parking lot, just like the message said, leaning against the car with his arms crossed and a smug sort of half smile. Vivian had smiled back. That alone was enough to make him glance twice. But she said nothing. The drive was quiet, the air between them thick with the kind of silence that used to mean comfort, but now just felt like a scream she hadn't let out yet. He turned on the radio. Jazz, something mellow, meaningless. Vivian watched the trees pass outside the window. Everything felt different now, tilted, disconnected. He didn't ask how the session went, didn't ask if she was in pain, didn't even glance over when she winced getting into the house. Instead, Calvin tossed his keys on the entryway table and went to the kitchen, muttering something about needing to make a quick call. She knew what call. Vivian stood by the door, unmoving, her knuckles white around the handle of her cane. Her knee ached from the exercises, but her heart, it throbbed with something far worse. She didn't know what stung more, that he had betrayed her with another woman, or that he had done it here while she was healing, while she was at her lowest. He hadn't even waited until she could walk on her own. Vivian walked past the staircase and into the living room. Her photo albums were still lined neatly on the shelf. 42 years of marriage preserved in fading ink. Smiling vacations, holiday dinners, his hand on her back, her hand on his. Had it ever really been love? She sat down and pulled out the most recent album, her retirement party, 5 years ago when she stepped away from her job as a school librarian. Calvin had smiled through the whole thing, made speeches, toasted her in front of friends, and yet, she'd felt lonely even then. He was never cruel, never raised his voice, but the warmth had gone cold years ago, and neither of them had dared name it. She had told herself it was age, familiarity, the ebb and flow of marriage. Now she saw it for what it was, neglect. She stared at a photo of them smiling at her grandniece's wedding. Melissa had the same smile in the clinic today, that same smug, plastered expression. Vivian imagined them together, secret lunches, shared glances behind her back, maybe even in their home, on her couch. Her stomach churned. She closed the album and sat up straighter. Pain was something she understood. It taught her things. But this wasn't just pain. This was betrayal. And betrayal, she'd learned over time, was a kind of teacher too. Vivian stood and walked, carefully but without hesitation, to the bedroom. Calvin's briefcase was on the chair, same one she'd packed for him every Monday morning for decades. She opened it. Inside were papers, his appointment book, and his phone charger. Not his phone. That would be in his pocket. She didn't need his phone. She needed proof, not just for her, but for the reckoning to come. Vivian walked to her desk, took out a small notebook, and began to write. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, not from fear, but from sheer clarity. She wrote down the date, the time, the message she saw. She described the way Melissa looked at Calvin. The moment she read that text, the giggle, the quick return with the resistance bands like nothing had happened. Every detail mattered now. Vivian wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to throw things. She was going to plan, because tomorrow she had one final appointment with the clinic to fill out her patient satisfaction paperwork. And Calvin, he thought they were going out for lunch afterward to celebrate her recovery. Vivian's lips curled into something almost like a smile. They would have lunch, all right, but it wouldn't be the kind of meal anyone would forget. That night, Vivian lay in bed beside Calvin, wide awake. He was already snoring, one arm thrown over the blanket like nothing in the world could touch him. Like the woman lying inches from him wasn't unraveling and reweaving herself in silence. Like the betrayal he'd served her with a side of routine wasn't lodged in her ribs like shrapnel. Vivian stared at the ceiling fan, counting each slow rotation. She could hear the echo of Melissa's laugh in her, head sharp, rehearsed, careless. That was the part she couldn't shake. The ease, how Melissa had stood there, stretching Vivian's leg, correcting her gait, all while texting her husband behind her back. Touching her, watching her struggle to rise. It felt dirty now, violent in its quiet deceit. Calvin shifted beside her and mumbled something in his sleep. She turned to look at him. Same man she'd married at 25. He had been steady, reliable. He brought her roses on her birthday. Always pink, never red. He made her tea when she was sick, drove her to her appointments, nodded through long conversations he didn't care to follow. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't present either. Not really. And now she knew why. She was the afterthought, a fixture, the good wife left to rot in the corner while he played the caring husband to the world. But Vivian wasn't going to let this become another quiet betrayal she swallowed down with her morning vitamins. Not this time. The next morning, Vivian rose early. She dressed with care. A soft lavender blouse, gray slacks, and a pearl pin Calvin had given her 20 years ago. Her hair curled gently at her temples. She looked like herself, but more alert, more awake. She brewed coffee, humming softly, setting out 2 cups. Calvin came down, yawning, phone in hand. She watched him glance at the screen with a half smile before slipping it into his pocket. He didn't know she saw that. "Morning," he said, kissing her cheek. "You sleep okay?" "Better than usual," Vivian replied, handing him his mug. "Thanks for planning lunch today. I'm looking forward to it." He looked pleased with himself. "Thought we'd go to Rossi's, the one with the big lemon trees outside." Vivian nodded, sipping quietly. "Sounds lovely." He had no idea he was walking into a trap of his own making. At the clinic, Vivian walked in on her own, cane tucked under her arm. She moved slower than most, but with intention. The receptionist smiled, congratulated her, handed her the discharge papers and a customer feedback form. "Just bring this to the front once you're done, sweetie," she said. Vivian took the clipboard, sat in the same seat she always did, and began writing. She was surgical. No rage, just facts. She wrote about the professionalism she used to feel, the sudden shift in Melissa's behavior during the last month, the inappropriate personal conversations, the visible text messages. She didn't speculate, she described. And at the end, she wrote the words she had practiced all night. "As a woman in recovery, I expected to be treated with dignity. Instead, I became collateral damage in someone else's secret. I trusted this place with my body. But what broke was my spirit, and it wasn't the surgery that did it." She signed her name and folded the paper neatly. Then she looked at her watch. Calvin would be circling the parking lot by now. Melissa emerged from the back hallway moments later, her eyes widening when she saw Vivian still there. Her smile faltered for just a beat. "Vivian, I thought you were done yesterday." Vivian stood. "I had to drop something off," she said, holding the folded paper. "For the office. It's about my experience." Melissa hesitated. "Oh, anything I should know?" Vivian looked her dead in the eye. "Number you already know." Melissa's face stiffened. She tried to recover with a polite laugh, but the color had drained from her cheeks. Vivian didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out, slowly, but with pride, her spine straighter than it had been in months. She stepped outside into the bright sun, where Calvin waited, parked by the curb in their silver sedan, engine running. He didn't know yet, but he would, and by the end of lunch, he'd know everything. Vivian slid into the passenger seat, her cane folding neatly beside her. Calvin smiled as if nothing in the world had changed. "You made good time," he said, pulling out of the parking lot. "I try," Vivian replied calmly, adjusting her seatbelt. The drive to Rossi's was familiar, one of the few places they still visited together, a restaurant with soft linen tablecloths and lemon trees lining the patio, casting gold-filtered shadows over every table. Calvin thought it was romantic. Vivian used to think so too. They were seated near the fountain in the corner. A young waitress brought menus and poured them water. Calvin ordered confidently. Vivian only asked for tea. Her appetite had left her somewhere between Melissa's smirk and Calvin's unlocked phone screen. Calvin leaned back in his chair, relaxing like a man who believed the world still revolved predictably around him. "You really did it," he said. "No cane now. Moving strong." Vivian nodded. "Thank you. I had help." He smirked. "Melissa's good, isn't she?" Vivian's eyes didn't flinch. "She's something." Calvin didn't seem to notice the weight in her voice. Or if he did, he ignored it. He picked up his phone, thumb tapping out a quick message, then placed it face down on the table. The move was deliberate. Practiced. Vivian's hands folded neatly in her lap. You know, Calvin said, reaching for his glass, we should take a trip. Now that you're moving better, maybe the coast? Maybe, Vivian replied softly. But I think you've already taken a few trips without me. Calvin looked up, confused. What? Vivian reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. Pale blue, her handwriting on the front. She placed it gently in the middle of the table. What's this? He asked. Open it. He hesitated. Go ahead, she said. It's just words, like the ones you sent her. Calvin's face tensed. Viv. Open it, Calvin. He did. Inside was a printout, photos of the text thread she had, seen, transcribed neatly in her handwriting. She had written every word she saw, every timestamp. Below it, she had added a note. I may walk slowly, but I don't look away. I may speak quietly, but I am not silent. And I may be older, but I am not stupid. Calvin looked up, color draining from his face. You went through my phone? No, Vivian said. I didn't need to. She left it open. Careless. Or confident. Maybe both. He swallowed hard. His hand trembled slightly as he folded the paper. Vivian, look, it wasn't... Don't lie. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The waitress arrived with tea. Vivian thanked her warmly, smiling as if nothing had passed. Calvin sat frozen, still holding the folded paper like a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. When they were alone again, Vivian leaned forward. Do you know what it's like, she said, voice low, to let someone help you up from a chair, guide your hands, touch your leg, stretch your body, while knowing they're lying to your face? While knowing they're laughing behind your back with the man you trusted most? Calvin blinked hard. It was a mistake. No, she said. A mistake is dropping a glass. This was a decision. Repeated, coordinated, and cruel. He started to reach for her hand. She pulled it away. You don't get to comfort me now. Silence hung between them. Vivian reached into her purse again and pulled out a second envelope. This one thinner. I submitted this to the clinic this morning, she said, placing it beside his wine glass. A formal complaint, detailing your affair, your texts, her conduct as a licensed professional. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. She may lose her license. You may lose whatever fantasy you thought this was. Calvin's voice came out hoarse. You're trying to ruin my life. Vivian lifted her tea calmly. Number. You did that all on your own. I'm just done pretending I didn't notice. He sat back in the stunned silence. Across the patio, a breeze stirred the lemon trees, petals fluttering like soft warnings. Vivian looked around, breathing in the moment. For the first time in years, she felt taller. Not because her knee had healed, but because something inside her had stood up. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She exposed him with nothing but truth. And she wasn't done yet. The drive back from the restaurant was nothing like the one before. Calvin didn't turn on the radio. His hands gripped the wheel tight, his jaw set like stone. He didn't glance at Vivian once. Not at the stoplight, not at the intersection near the park where they used to walk, not even when they pulled into the driveway. Vivian, on the other hand, stared straight ahead, calm, composed. Her hands rested neatly on her lap. She had spent decades learning how to keep the peace, to soften herself to make others comfortable. But now she realized comfort was not love, and silence was not grace. As Calvin parked and cut the engine, the air hung thick between them. He finally broke the silence. You don't have to do this, Vivian. She turned to him. Do what? Destroy everything. United States. Over something. Temporary. She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Temporary? That woman touched me, helped me walk. And all that time she was lying to my face, with you in her ear. You don't get to shrink this down to temporary. Calvin opened his mouth to respond, but she was already stepping out of the car. Inside the house, it felt colder than usual. The stillness wasn't peaceful anymore. It was loud. And for the first time in years, Vivian wasn't shrinking to fit the quiet. She was standing in it, letting it echo. She walked into the kitchen, placed her purse on the counter, and turned to face him. I want the truth now, she said. All of it. Calvin rubbed his temples. It was never about her. Vivian didn't blink. Then what was it? He sighed. I don't know, I just felt invisible, like we were roommates. Invisible? Her voice cracked, not with weakness, but disbelief. I've been recovering from surgery while you were slipping out the door. I've been invisible for years and still showed up. For you. For this house. For us. Calvin didn't respond. Vivian stepped closer. How long has it been going on? His pause was the answer. 6 months, he said finally. Started just before your surgery. She reeled back slightly, hand tightening around the back of a chair. So while I was in pain, learning to walk again, you were what? Flirting with her while I was strapped to a table? It wasn't like that. Yes, she cut in. It was exactly like that. She walked over to the dining room, ran her fingers across the table. The same table where they celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, quiet nights with soup and crossword puzzles. How many meals had she eaten with a man who had already left her in his heart? Vivian turned to him, calmer now. I want you to leave tonight. Calvin blinked. Vivian, I'm serious. Where am I supposed to go? To her, she said plainly, or to a hotel. I don't care, but you don't sleep in this house again. This is my home too. Vivian's voice dropped. Not anymore. He stared at her, almost as if waiting for her to soften, to cry, to change her mind. But she didn't. She didn't flinch, because for the first time in decades, she was protecting herself. Vivian walked over to the sideboard, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small folder. She handed it to him without a word. Inside, copies of the formal complaint, a list of everything she had documented, including the text message from Melissa's phone. She had written everything down, dated and signed. This isn't revenge, she said quietly. It's justice. Calvin looked defeated, the weight of exposure finally settling across his shoulders. I made a mistake, he muttered. Vivian shook her head. You made a choice, over and over again, and now you live with it. She turned and walked toward the stairs. Each step was slow but steady. Her knee ached, but her spine had never been straighter. Behind her, she heard Calvin slowly gathering his things, the rustling of a jacket, keys, his phone buzzing again and again in his pocket. Melissa, probably. He didn't answer it. Vivian reached the landing and paused, watching him from above like a ghost finally come back to life. When the front door closed and the house went quiet again, she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for years. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely. There was a difference, and now she understood it. The house felt different now. The silence wasn't something Vivian had to survive anymore. It was something she could finally inhabit. Not a punishment, a presence. She moved slowly through the living room that evening, every surface a reminder of the life they had built. The china cabinet filled with wedding gifts, the photo of them at the Grand Canyon, a dusty anniversary card he once left on the kitchen counter without signing. She had memorized this house like a second skin, but now it felt like she was seeing it for the first time, without the filter of tolerance. Vivian brewed herself a cup of chamomile tea. No second mug, no routine chatter about what shows to watch or whose turn it was to take out the trash. She sat in her favorite chair, pulled a soft blanket across her lap, and looked out the window. The neighbor's porch light flickered on. A mother across the street ushered 2 small kids inside, their laughter trailing behind them. A dog barked. Normalcy. Vivian cradled the mug in her hands. She should have been broken, a woman discarded in her most vulnerable state. But instead she felt rooted, like everything that had been buried beneath decades of compromise was finally surfacing. And then the doorbell rang. She startled, nearly spilling her tea. She rose carefully, setting the mug aside, and went to the door. Through the glass, she saw a familiar figure. Melissa, not in her scrubs. In casual clothes, tight jeans, a black jacket, heels too high for the walkway. Her hair was perfectly curled, her lips painted crimson. Vivian opened the door only slightly, her face unreadable. Melissa offered a tight, forced smile. Hi, Mrs. Grant. Vivian, she corrected. What do you want? I just... I wanted to talk, please. Vivian didn't move. About what? Melissa looked past her, as if expecting Calvin to appear. When she realized he wasn't there, her confidence faltered. I didn't know he was going to leave. I didn't ask him to. Vivian's lips thinned. You didn't have to ask. He was already halfway gone. Melissa bristled. I didn't mean for it to get this complicated. He said things. That you two weren't close anymore. That you were old, Vivian said sharply. Weak? Uninteresting? Melissa's mouth opened and shut. She hadn't expected the steel in Vivian's voice. Vivian stepped out, pulling the door behind her. I spent 12 weeks letting you touch the most broken parts of me, she said, while you laughed behind my back, while you plotted in plain sight. And now you want what? My forgiveness? Melissa scoffed. I didn't come here for forgiveness. Then why are you here? Vivian asked. Silence. Vivian watched her squirm, arms crossed, mouth tight. The boldness was gone now, stripped away. Melissa wasn't the woman who smirked behind clinic doors anymore. She was exposed, small, out of place. I came to tell you, Melissa finally muttered, that he's staying at a motel. That he said it's over. With me. Vivian raised an eyebrow. You thought I'd want to know that? I just thought maybe you'd feel like you won, like it was all for nothing. Vivian stepped closer. Her voice softened, not with pity but clarity. I didn't win, Melissa. I chose. I chose to reclaim my dignity, my voice, my name. You and he both made your choices. You traded integrity for attention. He traded commitment for cowardice. Melissa looked away, blinking too fast. And for the record, Vivian added, this isn't about you. It never was. You were just the crack in a foundation already rotting. All you did was speed up what was inevitable. Melissa turned to go, flustered, humiliated. Vivian stopped her with one final line. Oh, and you might want to call the clinic. I hear they're reviewing your license. Melissa froze, her breath caught. Vivian walked back inside, shutting the door slowly, firmly. She stood in the quiet hallway for a moment, her heart beat steady. She had faced the woman who betrayed her, not with fists, not with tears, but with truth. And that kind of confrontation didn't end in chaos. It ended in peace. Vivian picked up her tea again, still warm. She took a sip, and for the first time in a very long time, it didn't taste bitter. 3 days passed. Calvin hadn't come back, not to the house, not with apologies, not even with excuses. Vivian hadn't heard from him at all, but she knew that silence was only temporary. She'd lived with his patterns long enough to know how this would unfold. He would vanish to avoid discomfort, then reappear under the illusion of closure. He would arrive with flowers or a downcast expression, or maybe just a suitcase and a sigh. But this time, Vivian wouldn't be home when he came knocking. She had written him a letter instead. Not to explain herself. She owed him no clarity, but to end the story on her terms. That morning, she tucked the letter inside an envelope and drove herself, no cane, to the motel she knew he'd be staying at. She didn't need to see him. She just needed the front desk clerk to hand it to room 118, and they did. Inside the envelope were 4 pages. Carefully written. No accusations, just revelations. She told him how long she'd known, how seeing that message on Melissa's phone didn't just hurt, it healed her, because it forced her to confront the truth she'd been hiding from for years. She wrote, "The woman you married is still here, but she has changed. She now sees the cracks you hoped she'd ignore. She no longer finds strength in silence. She no longer begs to be seen." Vivian ended the letter by enclosing a photocopy of their prenuptial agreement and a typed notice for legal separation. Simple, professional, unemotional. But at the very bottom, she handwrote one final line. I may have lost years to your absence, but I refuse to lose myself now that I've found her again. She sealed the envelope with her wedding ring inside. It wasn't a symbol of grief anymore. It was a receipt for everything she had endured. As she stepped back into her car and turned the key, she didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just drove home, free. Later that evening, the doorbell rang. She didn't answer it. Instead, she lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and opened the notebook where she had begun writing again. Not journaling. Stories. On the first page, she wrote, Chapter 1, After the Betrayal. And just like that, Vivian's new life began. Not in grief, but in authorship. Weeks passed. Spring began to touch the edges of the trees. The forsythia bush by the front porch bloomed gold, like it had every year. But Vivian saw it differently now. She had changed more in the past few weeks than she had in the last 2 decades. Gone were the small, careful steps made to keep peace in a marriage long faded. In their place, real movement, bold steps, and choices made entirely for herself. She joined a small writing circle at the community library. Her voice trembled the first time she read aloud, but only once. After that, she read with conviction, with power. Her stories weren't about Calvin or Melissa. They were about resilience. Women like her. Women who quietly held the world up until the day they finally said, enough. People listened. They clapped. They cried. She even began volunteering at the rehab clinic. Not hers, of course, but a different one. She helped women recovering from injury learn how to move again. Not just their bodies, but their lives. Vivian's eyes, once dulled from years of invisibility, now shone when she spoke. She wore color again. Lavender, deep burgundy, ocean blue. Colors that felt alive, that felt like her. One evening, while tidying her living room, she came across an old photograph. Her and Calvin, 20 years ago on a beach. Smiling. He was holding her hand. She stared at it for a long moment. Then quietly she slid it into a drawer. Not to erase him, but because that chapter had closed. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from a new friend at her writing group. You still coming tomorrow? Your story last week was incredible. Vivian smiled softly, typed back, wouldn't miss it. And then, just as she reached to turn off the lamp, she looked at herself in the mirror across the room, shoulders back, eyes steady, a woman alone, but never more whole. Vivian had been broken, yes, but she had rebuilt herself piece by piece. And in the end, the betrayal didn't define her. Her response to it did.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.